Hey guys, what is up and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at some brand new updates that are already in Yuzu's latest Canary version that have given some significant both rendering and performance improvements to the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, obviously, yes, I could just play this on CMU, the Wii U emulator, where this game is pretty much flawless at this point in time. However, the main focus of this channel is to show all of you guys the latest updates and improvements to all of your favorite games on some of your favorite emulators. And while yes, this game is very playable on another emulator, this emulator for the Nintendo Switch platform will never be complete until this game, Breath of the Wild, is perfectly emulated. Until that point, when this game is basically perfectly emulated, I'm going to be covering every single major rendering update that this game gets, and as you can very clearly see in this latest Canary version of Yuzu Emulator, we have seen a very significant rendering and performance improvement. Now, in previous iterations of this Nintendo Switch emulator, you would have seen me cover this game already, and you would also have seen that while some of the graphics were indeed rendering, they were not rendering to anywhere near the fidelity that we are seeing on screen right now. Previously, we had absolutely enormous problems with performance where our frames per second would generally stay in and around 2 to 7 frames per second. You can see in my frame indicator in the bottom of this emulator's window that we are running closer to 15, 16, and sometimes it jumps up to 18 frames per second. We also previously had massive issues with pretty much how every single light source was being rendered in this game, and while obviously it is still not perfect, it is definitely miles better than anything we previously had and could definitely, at least in my book, be considered a major rendering update. As well as this, I haven't done any editing or retouching of any of this footage. The performance you're seeing and the speeds you're seeing on screen are exactly what you are going to experience if you are obviously running the game on the same PC specs as me. For anybody who doesn't know, I'm running an i7-8700K clocked at 4.8 GHz, 16 GB of DDR 3200 MHz RAM, and an NVIDIA GTX 980 Ti. Please bear in mind that if you are using a CPU that is a lot slower than an 8700K, you are going to have significantly lower performance at this point in time. This is simply due to the fact that in most modern emulators, your performance levels are going to be dramatically changed based on the power of your CPU. Now that all that info is out of the way, we can actually get back to some gameplay and take a look at how this is rendering and performing. So previously in our last look at this game on this emulator, you would remember that in this area, the Shrine of Resurrection, we previously would have absolutely nothing rendered in this area due to the fact that all of the light sources in the game were completely broken. As I've previously said, while yes, it's still not perfect, it is a hell of a lot better than what we previously had, and navigation through this area is actually now possible due to the fact that we can see the characters' silhouettes. You will also notice the fact that the bloom on any of these Sheikah runes and icons is no longer completely overexposed, and as with the first chamber in the Shrine of Resurrection, once we enter the second chamber, we are now also able to fully navigate around this room due to these fixed light sources. If you had seen the last video, you would remember that it took me quite a large amount of time to actually find these chests, get them open and get access to the worn clothes, and in another very cool graphical fix, they have also fixed the light source that emanates from any of these opened chests. Okay, so let's just skip forward in time by a few minutes at least, and I'm going to be speeding up this footage just to get us out into the open world section where I'm going to be able to show you all of the improvements that they have made to the lighting and the graphics rendering in this game. Right here on the Link character model, you can see just how much it has improved, and when we get back into active gameplay, you're going to see a very cool rendering bug that I really think makes the game look much cooler than it did in its original form. I really like the fact that the Shrine of Resurrection in this graphical bug is making it look really dark, and then as Link approaches the light itself, you can see his character model actually fully appearing. So let's proceed towards the exit of the Shrine of Resurrection, where you're going to be able to see even more of the rendering fixes that they have added in this latest Yuzu Canary version. So in all previous versions of Yuzu, you may remember that at all times in Breath of the Wild, there was this strange black shadow that would basically follow around at the very front of Link's character model. These have now been completely fixed, and as you're going to see once Link gets to some actual rendered terrain, they have also completely fixed the coordinate rendering of all of the shadows in the game. So as well as lighting and shadows being fixed in these latest Canary versions, they have also given us a fairly significant, I would say, performance boost in these open world situations. Remembering of course that I am using an 8700K and I am only running at 12 frames per second. When we previously tested this, it was running closer to 5, 6 and 7. Getting back into some actual gameplay once again, you're going to see that there are much more objects now being rendered in the game world. While obviously we're still missing pretty much 90% of all of the ground textures, and we're not actually missing them, they're just not being rendered correctly. If you actually move your camera and take a look underground, you can see that all of these ground textures are just being rendered at the completely wrong level. Moving further down into the Great Plateau area, you can see once again that these massive stone slabs, which were previously not rendered at all, are also now being correctly rendered. In open areas like this, you can just see how much of an impact the improvements to not only shadows but the lighting model have made to the emulation of this game on this Nintendo Switch emulator. Another very interesting fact is the point that when you stand on any of these stone slabs, which are themselves now rendered in game, you no longer sink through the ground like you previously did when standing still. Moving back to some shadow and lighting rendering fixes, you can see that these shadows, while obviously they're not rendered at their correct resolution right now, are indeed rendered. When we look up to the sky, you can see that these shadows are of the clouds. Moving over to another very weird rendering bug, and in relation to the terrain, you can see that at some points in time the terrain does actually properly render. Now this is quite strange because it seems to be rendering at the exact same distance that the level of detail pops in the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Switch. So for anybody who's not aware of it, there is actually this system in Breath of the Wild both on the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch. Basically what this rendering system does is it makes objects that are closer to you both in resolution, clarity and texture detail look much clearer in comparison to objects which are further away. So after I saw this bug for the first time, I checked on my Switch console and it is pretty much exactly the same distance away as this bug is happening, which kind of confirms the fact that this rendering bug is only happening due to some kind of LOD issue. Obviously, it's going to need to be fixed sooner rather than later, and hopefully it can be by these awesome emulator developers. I just thought I'd include this bug in this video because I thought it was so weird. So to showcase even more of these weird terrain rendering bugs, we had to activate the first tower, and once we do so, we will be able to see even more bugs with the height maps of these different terrain textures. After getting the area map, you can see once back in gameplay that these textures are not being rendered correctly at all, especially any of the ones off in the distance. Some more rendering fixes for the character models at least can be seen when King Rome paraglides down to us. You can see just how much better his face and character model is now being rendered. Skipping forward in time once again, we're going to be checking out exactly how the rendering of graphics, shadows and how performance is inside of these shrine locations, some of the least demanding areas in the game. So as with Yuzu Emulator, once you enter a shrine, you are going to see significantly better performance, and as with the overworld, you're also going to see significant improvements to both the rendering of graphics and rendering of shadows. Unfortunately, as with what we saw in the Shrine of Resurrection, in these areas that do not have any direct light, these shadows are actually rendered much too dark. They should be a much lighter shade and they shouldn't completely block out your character like you can see happens to Link right here. The next thing we want to do is we want to check whether some of the more physics-based runes like the Magnesis one we get in this shrine are currently working in the game. Unfortunately, while at this point in time you are able to activate them, they currently do not have any kind of interaction with the objects which they're supposed to have interaction with. This also unfortunately means that Breath of the Wild on Yuzu Emulator, even in its current broken state, is not playable due to the fact that several critical parts of the game require the use of this Magnesis rune. So obviously, even though we've seen lots and lots of improvements in this game, Breath of the Wild, and many other games on this Switch emulator, especially so in the last 2 weeks alone, it is still a long ways away from being fully playable or at least enjoyably playable on this Switch emulator. Regardless of any of this, massive credit and praise must go to the developers of Yuzu Even if we only see half the amount of progress in the next year that we've seen in the previous, we are going to have an absolutely awesome emulator in no time at all. As I always do guys, I'll be leaving a link to their official Patreon down in the description of this video. If you want to help with the development of this emulator, please head over there and pledge your support. If there are any games that you wish to see me cover in my compatibility guides for Yuzu Emulator, leave them down in the comments section below, and if you have any additional questions which you wish to have further answered, you'll also find a link to my Discord down in the description. So once again guys, cheers for checking out this video. Remember to like it if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, and as always, subscribe to the channel if you want to see all future videos from me.